In the quiet land of Moab, where the sun warmed the hills and the fields swayed under the cool evening breeze, lived a young woman named Ruth, only 19 years old, with eyes full of hope and a heart tender yet strong. Ruth had grown up hearing stories of distant lands and different peoples, but she never imagined that her life would become deeply tied to a family from faraway Bethlehem. It had started years earlier, when a man named Elimelech arrived in Moab with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, fleeing a famine in their homeland. The people of Moab received them kindly, and for a time, life seemed peaceful. Ruth eventually married Mahlon, and her sister-in-law Orpah married Chilion. Ruth loved Naomi deeply. Naomi was gentle, wise, and warm-hearted. Ruth often sat at Naomi's feet, listening to stories of the God of Israel, stories of deliverance, faith, courage, and love. Ruth was fascinated by Naomi's faith, a faith unlike anything she had known, a faith built on trust in a God who seemed near and compassionate. But life, with all its unpredictability, soon struck the household with relentless sorrow. First, Elimelech died, leaving Naomi heartbroken, but trying to remain strong for her sons. Then, as though grief had become a shadow determined to stay, Mahlon and Chilion also died. Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah were left widows, with pain so heavy that words often failed them. Naomi felt abandoned by life, convinced that her journey had ended in bitterness. Ruth, however, felt something different, something stirring deep within her spirit, something that connected her heart to Naomi's even more fiercely than before. One morning, Naomi woke with a decision. She would return to her homeland, Bethlehem, for she had heard the famine had ended, and God had blessed the land again. She gathered her things with trembling hands, preparing to leave Moab forever. Ruth and Orpah walked beside her on the dusty road out of the city, silent but unwilling to let her go alone. After some miles, Naomi stopped and turned to them, tears filling her eyes. "My daughters," she said softly, "go back to your families. You have shown me more love than I could ever repay. May the Lord grant you rest and new husbands, that you may find joy again." Orpah, though torn by grief, kissed Naomi goodbye and slowly walked back toward Moab. Ruth, however, stood still. Naomi pleaded again, her voice quivering. "Ruth, my child, go back. I have nothing to offer you, no husband, no sons, no future. My sorrow will only burden you." But Ruth took Naomi's hands in hers, her eyes burning with unwavering devotion. "Do not ask me to leave you," she whispered. "For where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Naomi was overwhelmed. She had never seen such love pure, loyal, unbreakable. And so, the 2 women continued their journey together, stepping into an unknown future, guided by a faith Ruth had embraced as her own. The road was long, stretching over rocky hills and through dusty plains. Naomi's pace was slow, and Ruth supported her, often sharing her own food and water. Travelers who saw them wondered what bound them so strongly, for it was rare for a Moabite woman to cling to an Israelite mother-in-law with such devotion. But Ruth did not care about opinions. She cared only about honoring the love God had stirred in her heart. When they finally reached Bethlehem, the town was buzzing with life, women chattering by the wells, children running between homes, and the aroma of fresh grain drifting from the fields filled the air. As Ruth and Naomi walked into the city, curious whispers rose from the townspeople. "Is this Naomi?" they asked in disbelief. Naomi, worn with grief, replied, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Ruth gazed at her with compassion, wishing she could absorb some of Naomi's sorrow. They settled into Naomi's old family home, a small, dusty place that had been vacant for years. Food was scarce, and Naomi felt ashamed that she had nothing to offer Ruth, who had given up everything. But Ruth, driven by love and determination, decided she would provide for them. It was harvest season, and the fields were alive with workers gathering barley. Ruth asked Naomi's permission to go and glean, a process where the poor followed behind harvesters to pick up leftover grain. Naomi agreed, praying silently for Ruth's protection. That morning, Ruth wrapped her hair neatly, pulled her clothes tight, and set out toward the fields with courage guiding her steps. By divine providence, Ruth entered the fields of a wealthy and respected man named Boaz, a 5-year-old, kind-hearted landowner who happened to be a relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz arrived from Bethlehem just as Ruth was bending over to gather stray stalks of barley. The sunlight cast a gentle glow over the field, and the workers paused when they saw their master approaching. "The Lord be with you," Boaz greeted them warmly. "The Lord bless you," they replied. As Boaz surveyed the field, his eyes fell upon a young foreign woman working diligently. She was humble, focused, and unlike many gleaners he had seen, she moved with quiet grace. Curious, Boaz asked his overseer, "Who is that young woman?" The overseer answered, "That is the Moabite girl who returned with Naomi. She asked if she could glean behind the harvesters, and has worked from morning until now with barely a rest." Boaz felt a stirring of admiration. He walked toward Ruth, who looked up nervously as he approached, unsure how she would be received. "Listen, my daughter," Boaz said gently. "Do not go to another field. Stay close to my workers. I have told the young men not to touch you, and when you are thirsty, drink from the jars the men have filled." Ruth bowed deeply, overwhelmed by his kindness. "Why have I found favor in your eyes?" she asked. "When I am a foreigner," Boaz smiled. "I have heard all that you have done for Naomi, how you left your homeland, your family, and your people to care for her. May the Lord repay you richly. May you be rewarded by the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." His words strengthened Ruth's heart. Throughout the day, Ruth worked tirelessly, and Boaz instructed his workers to purposely leave extra grain for her to gather. By evening, Ruth had collected an astonishing amount. When she returned home, Naomi was amazed. "Where did you glean today? Blessed be the man who took notice of you," Naomi exclaimed. When Ruth mentioned the name Boaz, Naomi's eyes widened with hope. "Boaz, he is one of our family's guardians, one who can redeem us." That night, Naomi praised God for guiding Ruth to the very man who could change their lives. Ruth lay awake, thinking of Boaz's kindness, not yet knowing how deeply her life was being woven into a divine plan of restoration and love. But her faith, her humility, and her devotion to Naomi had already begun to open doors she had never imagined. Ruth woke the next morning with renewed purpose, her heart full of gratitude for the kindness Boaz had shown her. Naomi watched her prepare to leave for the fields again, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in a long while, Naomi felt a small spark of hope, something she thought she had lost forever. Ruth returned to Boaz's fields day after day, gleaning faithfully from sunrise to sunset. She worked with humility, gathering every stalk of grain with diligence, and the workers came to respect her for her gentle nature and tireless effort. Boaz often observed her from a distance, admiring the way she carried herself, never complaining, never taking more than she needed, always grateful for whatever she found. Sometimes he walked over to her, offering comforting words or checking on her well-being. The warmth of his kindness made Ruth feel safe and seen, something she had not felt since her husband's death. She remained humble, never expecting more than the opportunity to work and provide for Naomi, yet Boaz's generosity continued to overflow in ways she never anticipated. As the days passed, the harvest season drew to an end, and Naomi began to sense that God was orchestrating something far greater than they could see. She recognized the favor Ruth had with Boaz and understood the significance. Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, someone who had the right to restore Elimelech's family line and property. But he would only act if prompted, for tradition required a formal request from the family seeking redemption. One evening, Naomi called Ruth to sit beside her. Her voice was soft but full of purpose as she explained the custom of approaching the kinsman redeemer during the time of winnowing at the threshing floor. Naomi gently instructed Ruth on what to do, ensuring she understood every step. Though the thought of approaching Boaz made Ruth nervous, she trusted Naomi's wisdom completely. Naomi's directions were clear and rooted in the traditions of their people. So Ruth bathed, anointed herself with oil, and wore her best clothing not to seduce, but to present herself respectfully and honorably in accordance with the custom. When night fell, and the workers finished eating and celebrating the end of harvest, Boaz lay down by a heap of grain to rest. Ruth waited until he was asleep, then quietly approached him. With trembling hands, she uncovered his feet and lay down there, a gesture of humility and a request for protection under his covering. Around midnight, Boaz awoke, startled, and saw a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked gently. Ruth replied in a soft voice, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your garment over me, for you are a family redeemer." Her words were not romantic but deeply meaningful, expressing a plea for redemption, for restoration, for a future grounded in faith. Boaz was moved beyond words. "May the Lord bless you, my daughter," he said. "You have shown great kindness, for you have not pursued younger men, whether rich or poor. Do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. For the whole town knows you are a virtuous woman." Yet Boaz was honest about one important detail. There was another man, a closer relative, who had the first right to redeem Naomi's family. Boaz promised to settle the matter in the morning. He protected Ruth's dignity by sending her home before dawn with generous amounts of grain, a sign to Naomi of his honorable intentions. When Ruth returned home, Naomi immediately understood the significance of Boaz's gifts. She assured Ruth that Boaz would not rest until he resolved the matter. True to her words, Boaz went early to the city gate, the place where legal matters were handled, and gathered the elders. When the nearer relative arrived, Boaz respectfully presented the situation, offering him the opportunity to redeem Naomi's property, and in doing so, marry Ruth to preserve the family line. When the man realized this responsibility, he declined, concerned it would complicate his own inheritance. Before the witnesses, he officially transferred the right of redemption to Boaz. With joy and relief, Boaz stood before the elders and the people, declaring that he would redeem Naomi's land and take Ruth as his wife. Word spread quickly through the town, and the people celebrated, blessing Ruth with the same favor God had given to the matriarchs who came before her. Ruth could hardly believe everything happening around her. Only months earlier, she had arrived in Bethlehem with nothing but her devotion to Naomi. Now she was stepping into a future overflowing with hope, one she had never imagined possible. When Boaz came to Naomi's house to share the news, Ruth felt an indescribable peace wash over her. Naomi's eyes filled with grateful tears. The God she once felt distant from had shown himself faithful in ways she never expected. The wedding took place soon after. Bethlehem rejoiced as Ruth, the young Moabite woman once seen as an outsider, was welcomed fully into the community. Her love, humility, and unwavering loyalty had transformed the hearts of the people. And Boaz, noble and compassionate, cherished her deeply. Together, they built a home founded on faith, kindness, and righteousness. Naomi moved in with them, her heart healed by the restoration God had brought into her life. The sorrow that had once consumed her was replaced with joy she never imagined she would experience again. In time, God blessed Ruth with a son. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Naomi, celebrating her blessing and declaring, "Praise be to the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Naomi held the child Obed close to her heart, tears streaming as she felt God's love in the tiny bundle of life resting peacefully in her arms. Ruth watched tenderly, her heart full. Obed would grow up to become the grandfather of King David, placing Ruth, a foreigner, a widow, a woman of unwavering faith, directly in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Ruth's journey, marked by loyalty, sacrifice, and trust in God, became a shining example for generations. Her story proved that God sees the humble, honors the faithful, and writes extraordinary destinies from the simplest acts of love. And so Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi lived with joy, peace, and gratitude, forever grateful for the grace that transformed their lives and wove them into God's eternal plan.